Welcome to Rock Talk. I'm your host, Willie.
And I'm your host, Kayla.
You know the mantra. Sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the show.
Today, I'm going to be interviewing Willie about Granite turnaround time. So you will need your legacy book because we're going to be referring to this throughout the show. So for domestic turnaround time, how does that work?
Not only with domestic, but also with overseas, when you order, either domestic or overseas, of course, there is 3 different steps in both categories. As you look on page 14 and 15, there's actually a really good description on how it works.
Okay, so for step 1, what is that?
Step 1 is when you're sitting down with a family or an individual and they order a memorial through you and you fill out what they want, size, color, shape. You send in that order to us, and from there that order gets processed through the company.
Okay, so what is step 2?
Step 2 is actually the process after we receive the contract or the order, and we send that off to the vendor, and then the vendor has to go out and quarry that product. So with that process domestically can take up to 6 weeks for them. Once they receive the contract from us, then they have to quarry that product. So right now you're up to about 7 weeks from when the contract gets to our location.
Okay, so then finally step 3.
Step 3 is actually when the product that they quarried and they cut down or polish or whatever you have ordered or whatever you have ascertained from the family, that product then comes into our door, and then we have to manufacture what carving, lettering, designs they want on that product. And that means coming into the door, going through the manufacturing process, our plant per se, and then actually getting delivered and installed out to the cemetery.
Okay, so how long does that take again?
That takes up to 4 weeks in step 3.
Okay.
So when you add it up, it actually adds up to about 11 weeks max. I know in the book it says 7 to 10 weeks, but you always like to aim high just because quarrying granite, things can go wrong, sandblast can shut down, you just never know. So if you aim high, it actually you actually avoid disappointment with families.
Okay, Willie, so do the same steps apply for when you're ordering overseas?
Absolutely. It's the same exact steps. The only thing that is different, of course, is timing. And it's quite a bit longer. But like I said, if they want a certain color, and a lot of them do come from overseas just to get that color, they are going to have to wait a little bit. With that said, though, we do have vendors that are in the States, the U.S., that do carry standard-sized overseas colors. I hope that made sense. So like a jet black, which is quarried overseas, vendors in the States, some vendors, not all, do carry standard-sized memorials in jet black.
Okay, so a standard size memorial shape and size. What's an example of that?
The best example I can use for that is like a monument and a base. You have your 3 foot by 1/8, 3 foot by 6 by 1/8 monument, and then the base would be a 4 by 1 by 6. That's your most standard, most common monument and base. So if there's anything that is even a little bit off size with that, so like for the monument, if it's a 3'2" width, they're not going to have that. They can cut it down, but you're going to get charged for that domestic labor.
Okay. So then you said the timing's going to be a little different. So since the steps are the same, what's the timing for step 1?
Step 1 is actually the same exact time as what it was for domestic, just because it's only a week for us to process the order once you retrieve that from the family.
Okay. So then step 2.
Step 2, this is where the timing gets pretty drastic from ordering it domestic. It can take up to 20 weeks for them to quarry and polish or chip or whatever custom shape that you want. It takes up to about 20 weeks for that product to get from overseas, quarried, make what you want to have made, and then shipped to us.
Okay, so then lastly with step 3, how long does that take?
Step 3 is the same as domestic because now we have the granite. It has to go through our plant process to get what you want engraved on that memorial. And that is the same as domestic. It's 2 to 4 weeks. So if you do the math, it's about 25 weeks it can take up to. But when it's overseas, we do add a couple weeks onto that, actually 3 weeks onto that, just because containers can get held up. You just never know what's in those containers. Trains can get held up, ships, you just never know. One simple little bug can hold up a whole entire ship. It's pretty ironic.
Okay.
So with that said, sorry to interrupt, but with that said, it can take up to 28 weeks for that to get ordered, come in our door, go out the door and be delivered. It can take up to 28 weeks.
Okay, so that is a little bit different than domestic. So knowing that, what is the pros and cons versus ordering domestic and overseas?
The pros and cons for the difference between the two, the pros are definitely domestic, you're going to get quicker. Heritage, that's right at our next door. And it's domestic labor. Meaning faster completion. So yeah, because they quarry it, we get it a lot faster because we don't have to wait for trains or ships. Ordering overseas is the lower cost in labor. And with that said, we do a lot of sculpted stuff overseas because it's much more affordable. So it does cost quite a bit to have stuff like that made domestically.
Okay, so what are the negatives to ordering domestic versus overseas?
Negatives between the two would be domestic. Your color selection is very limited. It's a lot more expensive because it's labor-intensive work is more expensive in the States compared to overseas. The negatives for overseas compared to domestic is timing, of course. For overseas, you're looking at up to 28 weeks. Compared to domestic, you're looking at up to 10. And the negatives for overseas as well is possible custom delays, meaning when it goes on a ship or a train, you have to go through customs and they check everything. And there can be translation issues as well from ordering overseas.
So in recap, if you review pages 14 and 15 for Granite turnaround time for domestic and overseas, it'll be a great tool in helping you aid in sales.
Thanks for viewing this episode of Rock Talk.
We hope you learned something. Cheers!
Ready?
Yeah.
Alright. Gotta get my shit together. Welcome to Rock Talk. Whenever you're ready.
If you turn to page 14 and 15 in your legacy book, we'll talk about Granite turnaround time. What else do we say?
Locally. And overseas is obviously overseas. I feel like we should reshoot that.
I feel like we should too. Kind of sucked.
Yeah. We just gotta figure out how to word it right.
Because, like, when I asked the question, I felt like I was talking stupid.
Right. That's where I've screwed up too. the next question almost should be, what determines if it's domestic or overseas?
Okay.
There's usually 3 steps to kind of the revolution of ordering granite. The monument or the slant or what have not. I screwed that up. So ask that question again.
Okay.
The sculptured work. Am I saying that right? Sculpted work.
Yeah, like a sculpted angel you're
I'm
kind
gonna
of
just-
talking
Yeah, we're gonna
about?
have to redo that.
Okay.
The pros for